Simon, China, the rise of China, we've seen investment in football clubs across the Premier League and in the Championship, etc. We've seen players going over to China. What's the impact of China? Why has China suddenly become this football superpower?
China has really tried to grow as a football nation, I think, twice over the last couple of decades. Once in 2002, 2003 on the back of their appearance in the World Cup. And then again kind of 2010, 2011, 2012, and that was the Drogba and Anelka era. But what's happening now is very different to those two periods because it comes from the very top now that football should be important. So back in 2014, China's President Xi announced that he wants China to have created the world's biggest sport economy, domestic sport economy, by 2025. And he targeted football in particular as being a main driver of the move towards that target. In particular, he said he wants China to host the World Cup. And even more specifically than that, he wants China to win the World Cup. So this comes right from the very top. And generally what tends to happen in China is when the president says he wants something doing, people go away and do it.
So why are Chinese companies in particular, in consortiums, why are they investing in Premier League clubs, for example, and to a great extent in the Championship as well? We've seen as the Wolves have been taken over by a Chinese consortium. What's the interest there?
I think really there are two aspects to it. The first aspect is China needs to learn about football. They need to learn about identifying talent and developing talent. They need to know about creating successful teams. They need to know about bidding for events like the World Cup. But they also need to know about, for example, how to acquire sponsors and how to manage those sponsorship relationships. They need to understand how to invest in football and where the returns come from. And so the investments that we've seen, not just in English clubs, but clubs across Europe, but also in organisations like Infront Sports and Media, is at one level it's about making money, but at another level it's about learning. But I think ultimately what China wants to do is to win the World Cup. And clearly China doesn't have a track record or a legacy of producing elite performing football teams, and so part of their investment strategy, part of their strategy overall, is to acquire properties that will enable them to learn what they need to know to construct these teams that will be able to compete with the world's best.
And you say they're obviously on a bit of a learning curve, but is that not a potential danger to the clubs that they've invested in the UK? If they're just learning how to do these things and they're investing in some of the biggest clubs in the UK and in Europe, is there not a danger there that they're investing and they're not really sure what they're doing?
My view is this is not like the Abramovich era Chelsea where sugar daddies from overseas just plough money into a football club for whatever reason. The Chinese are very, very shrewd, and I would say to anybody who's looking at Chinese investment and trying to understand who they are and what they're doing, is they're very shrewd business people. There's been a lot of talk about financial windfalls and will the likes of West Brom and Wolves and others spend huge amounts of money on players? No, they won't. Unless, of course, there's a proven return on investment for the Chinese investor. I think principally the Chinese are using their investments in clubs to curry favour with the Chinese government. I think they're using them to learn how to run football more effectively in China, to manage football more effectively in China. And they're also using it for business networking purposes, because obviously football is a great way of introducing you to other British businesses and businesses across Europe. But certainly Chinese investment is not Abramovich type investment. It simply isn't.
Mm-hmm. And what about from a commercial perspective? Clubs are going over and looking for potential sponsors in China. What are the opportunities available for clubs in terms of shirt sponsorship, for instance?
Right now, tough, really, really tough. Yeah. To quote one of my contacts in China I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, it's like working inside a clam that has just slammed shut. So earlier this year, the Chinese government issued an edict which basically said that Chinese investors need to moderate their irrational investments in football. And so since then, we've seen far fewer players being signed. Players who have been signed on lower transfer fees. But we've also seen sponsors, investors in football being much more I don't think I use the word cautious, but much more moderate in the way they've gone about their business. I think for anybody in football, English football, European football more generally, if you're looking towards China, is have a very clear business case underpinning what you're looking for, so that when a Chinese investor asks what's in it for me, you've got some hard numbers and you can say X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, this is what's in it for you.